I'm Richard Edelman. Welcome to the 2026 Edelman Trust Barometer launch. I'm joined by Alan Murray, Wall Street Journal, Janet Truncale from Ernst & Young, Arvind Krishna from IBM, Dan Schulman from Verizon, David Miliband from the IRC. This morning, I'm going to talk to you about the next crisis of trust, insularity. We've moved from polarization, starting 10 years ago, which is political, to grievance a year ago, which is aggressive belief that the system is broken, to now insularity. And insularity means that I only want to associate with those whose values, whose media sources, and whose solutions to social issues are the same as mine. What are the consequences of insularity? You believe in a zero-sum game. You have a psychological state that chooses the familiar over the possibility of the new. You choose a closed ecosystem of trust. You have a limited worldview and a narrow opinion. You have intellectual stasis and cultural rigidity. Distrust is your default. You believe in individual benefit over mutual advancement. You withdraw from dialogue and compromise, and you prefer nationalism to global connectivity. There are macro forces that have caused insularity. The first is the great switch-off, people avoiding news. Second is economic anxiety, which has multiple aspects, specifically the imposition of tariffs, and over half of people worry about inflation. There's massive fear of AI. In developed markets, 2/3 of people oppose the implementation of AI because of the risk of job loss. There's a collapse of optimism. In our study, we find not a single developed country has over 20% belief that his or her family will be better off in the next generation. Further, there's eroding institutional trust. In the bottom quartile of income, there's a 40-point gap now between business and government. The mass class divide has become transversal. It is no longer a US, UK, France. It's now in Saudi, it's in Indonesia, it's in Thailand. Whether countries are doing well economically or poorly, the mass class divide exists. What are the implications of insularity? First, fear of foreign. We see a huge spike in nationalism, specifically a massive trust advantage for domestic producers. For example, in Canada, 30-point delta between a company based in Canada and a multinational. We see a shift from we to me. We trust our own choices of information sources, specifically our Substacks, our podcasts, our curated social feeds. We no longer have broad view, it's quite vertical. We distrust the establishment. 70% of people say, I believe our leaders are liars. CEOs, government leaders, and media leaders. It's very hard to solve problems such as reskilling or affordable housing when you have this level of divide. Business has basically kept its head down for the last 2 years, hoping the storm will pass. Today, I will argue there is no such thing as business as usual. It's impossible to operate as a multinational against domestic competition with this level of geopolitical insularity. You see serious rise of developing market brands, Chinese, Indian. In the UK, Chinese cars are 10% of the market. We also see the possibility of a much slower pace of acceptance of innovation. The CEO of Moderna last night talks about mRNA vaccines for cancer. based on the acceptance of COVID vaccines, that's pretty problematic. Leave aside the AI issue. There's also dysfunction within the company based on insularity. Literally half of our respondents say, I will not follow a CEO who has different values than me, and my response will be that I will slow walk it at work. Nice. Also, one third of our respondents say, I want fewer foreign companies in our market, even at the cost of higher prices or less choice. That is nationalism. Usually, Edelman Trust Barometer ends at that point, leaving you all massively depressed. So, we thought for 2026 we would change the script and think about possible solutions. And we have a couple. I want to introduce trust brokering. Trust brokering attempts to restore trust between alienated parties. We try to bridge differences and find common ground, to surface common interests. In short, to disagree better. What does it mean? You convene small groups within the four walls of the company. It is not necessarily led by the CEO. It could be the line supervisor. It could be the country manager. The goal is to be a convener and not an advocate. This is something new for business. We need to listen better and accept that other people have views that matter. This role is best done by my employer. In our study, you will remember that business is by far the most trusted institution, the only one both competent and ethical. But my employer is 15 points higher than business. Why? Because there's agency. If I'm an employee, I control that relationship because in theory I have the choice not to be there. Also, it's the only institution trusted by both the insular and the open. My employer. Within the company, though, we need to utilize scientists, experts, co-workers. This is not a one-man or woman game. And we need to be brave enough to use important members of the community, doctors, pharmacists, pastors, people with local credibility. Give them the power to broker trust, to solve the divides. Importantly, every institution has a role in trust brokering. NGOs, which for the first time have lower trust, believe it or not, as ethical operators than business, have an important role of translating between contesting groups. Government has got to set the right tone. We need to stop this level of inflammatory rhetoric. Media must de-escalate tension and report on both sides of a story. And for business, bring people to the office to interact, people of all stripes. I know that the safe play for business for the last 2 years has been keep your head down, increase your stock price, and make money. That time is up. Business needs to take the lead now, within its four walls, and by what it does in its operations. Beyond trust brokering, we also believe deeply in a theory of being a polynational, that you need to localize supply chains, be visible in the community. Arvind just told me about IBM Japan. It's been there for 100 years. Local management, local connectivity, contributing to Japan's economic growth. Similarly, Unilever has Hindustan Lever for more than 50 years. Again, a pillar of the local community. But we also have to be serious as business about two other topics. One, we must participate in improving the social media bloodstream. There is too much disinformation. It is run by foreign actors. We have knowledge that others don't. We cannot allow primary source material to be social media without our participation. Finally, on reskilling, and I want to give Dan Schulman credit, and he can talk about it later, but he's been a major advocate for upskilling and reskilling of people who are going to be left behind in the current change. So my conclusion is as follows. The Trust Barometer this year is deeply important. We've moved to a new crisis of trust, insularity. We have developed a hard tortoise shell of belief. We've withdrawn within that shell. It's a very unstable situation. Therefore, to get trust back, we have to adopt this mantra. Trust drives growth, but action earns trust. No more business as usual. We have to build trust from the bottom up. There's receptivity to this because 3/4 of our respondents say, I know insularity is negative, but they don't know how to get out of it. The stakes are enormous, the system has to work for all, and business needs to lead. Alan, to you.
Well, Richard, first of all, I want to thank you for doing this massive study every year for the last 25 years. I'm not sure people fully recognize how much work goes into getting 33,000 responses across the world in a world where people distrust a lot of things, including pollsters. So thank you for that. It is certainly a wake-up call. I came here for coffee, but you know that's more bracing. That's more bracing than the coffee. So thank you for doing that, and thank you, panelists. Arvind, I'd really like to start with you because you and I have had a number of conversations over the course of the last year that reflect what you see when we walk down the promenade. This incredible enthusiasm, excitement about this new technology, AI, and what it can do. But clearly there's a gap between what the CEOs on the promenade are thinking and what the public is thinking. And I wonder how big a problem you think that trust gap is for the development of AI.
Look, you got to get back to, it's the basic cause, and Richard laid it out, is that people are feeling, you can use the word grievance, you can feed, I believe the word is that many people feel is the lack of opportunity. So the role for business leaders first becomes, how do we talk about the opportunities that we are creating, not just everything else? And that is a fundamental role that business has played in most societies. You create employment, you create growth, you create opportunity. Those people in turn carry it into their communities. They do the things with the monies that they earn from the jobs. And it's got to be done in a way that is ethical. So now let's get to AI. I don't think there is a single technology. I kind of call AI the 8th in a long series since the 1700s. So not that many. So we're not talking the minor ones. Every single one of them has had the same exact reaction. First of all, so this is not new. I don't know it. It's strange to me. It's going to change. I don't believe it's going to change the total number of jobs, but let's acknowledge it will change the nature of some jobs. And not being honest about that causes an issue. Inside our company, back to Richard's four walls comment, we are quite clear. There will probably be about 10% displacement, but we will have net addition. And so that is something that has to get talked about. What do we do? To Dan's point about upskilling our own people on that topic, we made a commitment to upskill actually 30 million people outside our company on that topic. That does take money and resource. So how do you put all of that together? The last thing I'd like to say on Richard's point, economic models change. So if a company wants to be in a place only to extract profits and revenue and then leave, that is the big negative that many people perceive, and that I think is the root cause behind that gap. I think he said 30 points in some countries between national and multinational. So the old multinational model, I think, is dead. You got to talk about what are you going to do. When I go and talk, whether it's in Japan or the UK or Germany, the conversation becomes, what are you doing to help our nation and our people? They don't actually mind. They say, we understand you have to make a profit and you got to make revenues to satisfy your own employees and shareholders. There's no negativity, but it's an and. And what are you doing to help locally?
And you have to address that.
You don't have to address it. You actually have to do it. There has to be actual action behind it. It's not the words are not sufficient.
Yeah, Janet, you talked to hundreds of CEOs, work with hundreds of companies. Do you see this trust gap widening within companies, and what are the implications?
Yeah, so I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic. And I believe I agree with so much of what you've said. If I look a year ago, when we talked about AI, it was kind of like the bolt-on AI, very much focused on productivity and workforce. And so that's where you kind of get that lack of trust or confusion or concern about job loss.
They're coming after my job.
Yeah, they're coming after my job. And so, but now you're seeing a pivot to organizations really thinking about how do you build in AI to greater transformation into the operations, operating models, processes. And then you start to talk about the opportunities that AI provides. We're also seeing 70% of the CEOs, we just announced our CEO Outlook survey this morning, really start to talk about growth enabled by AI. So when you start to see that pivot, I think that's where you have to be talking a little bit more about the opportunities that you see with AI. And when you think about the workforce, look, we have a responsibility. We did a workforce survey recently, and 12% of the workforce felt that they were getting advanced AI training in order to do their job. That's on us. And we need to really
You're saying that's not enough.
That's not enough. And that's where, again, a lot of this distrust, this concern about jobs. I look at our organization, we have 400,000 people, and we've been training about 90% of our workforce at varying levels, but we're really focused on that and talking about it. I think a lot about, we use this term about kind of, AI kind of lifting the floor, but that you need the human, subjectivity, strategy, trust, creativity to really, lift the ceiling for our employees in terms of, what's the art of the possible. So, we also talk within Ernst & Young, we've got lots of trained professionals, that AI helps you operate at the top of your license so you can accelerate your career a little bit more, but then again, there's just so much more to go.
Yeah, I want to come back to the training piece, but Dan, let me go to you next. I mean, the last time we talked, you painted a very comprehensive picture of how this technology or set of technology revolutions is different than things we've seen in the past, at least in terms of the pace at which it's happening. How do you mitigate the fear and anxiety that's naturally going to cause with the public?
It's going to be very hard, I think, to mitigate it. I mean, look, people hate change. People win the lottery, which you have to say is probably a good change in your life, and they get divorced and lose friends, and it's very hard to navigate change. And I think we have more change happening now, at least a technological revolution, than I think any of us have seen in our lifetime. You have three waves happening. You have the AI wave that everybody talks about. But that AI wave is it's just breaking right now. Like, the models we have today are the most frail, the weakest models we'll ever have in our lifetime. I mean, there are AI CEOs that I've been talking to this week. They're going to put out 8 models this year, 8 iterations. Every one of those models is a step function improvement. So every month and a half, models get better by step function. And they are on the precipice right now of assisting us to do our jobs better, like you were saying, to replacing us. And that is going to happen. And I think we just need to be very upfront about it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Second, quantum is going to happen. In the next 5 years, we're going to have pretty massive qubits, error-free qubits, data centers that, as Arvind and I have spoken, that's 1,000-time improvement in compute power. That's 5 years away. AGI, in my view, is 2 to 4 years away. It depends on how you define it, but in many ways, it's here already. But think about how quickly the models are going. And then you've got humanoid robotics. It's probably 7 to 8 years away. These are technologies that are, AGI is machines that can do everything we do better than we can do it. These are not the printing press. Don't get me wrong, I thought that was a great innovation, but
yeah, me too.
But everyone talks about, we went from the agricultural age to where we are today without losing unemployment. We were 93% agriculture. Today we're 3% agriculture in the U.S. Yes, but that happened over like 5 decades or something. This is going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. And I don't see any way that you have more unemployment, and not that we're not going to get more productive and all of that, but I think this is a big issue from a public-private policy-making environment that we have to lean into, because we are going to see unemployment levels go up. And yes, we got to train. Yes, there may be like a Cambrian explosion of entrepreneurship, but it's going to take time. And meanwhile, in the next 2 to 4 years, you're going to see these models replacing humans. And I think that's why this trust, it's not surprising to me to see trust go down, because there's so much change happening right now. And I think as CEOs, our job is to talk about this with authenticity and with realism. And, you know, as I say at all employee meetings inside Verizon, like, we live in the age of AI. We live in an age of technology that is shifting rapidly right now. You may or may not like it, but that is the age that we live in right now, and it will have profound effects on it. And I think being as upfront as we possibly can be, trying to imagine how we reskill and re-educate, but you know, in like conversations I had a couple of years ago with the White House, like they're all like, well, we'll reskill. And I'm like, to what will you reskill? To what? Like, you know, customer service jobs, most of that will go away. Programming, we know most of that will go away. Legal probably gets cut in half. I mean, you have to really kind of think about what that future looks like. And we need, again, to think about public-private policy making, because the private sector can't do it alone, and for sure the public sector can't do it alone, and we've got to figure that out if we're going to address these trust issues, because change is going to happen.
And you can't ignore it. It has profound effects on businesses.
There's no way you can ignore it. No business can afford to ignore it. We are all going to adapt it aggressively inside our organizations to be able to compete going forward.
I want to come back to that in a minute and get a little bit more tactical about what business can do. But David, first I'd love for you to get into
Anyway, I will be more optimistic by next time.
Good, okay, good. Yeah, that's the other reason I'm coming back. We're going to leave everybody feeling good at the end of the morning. But David, I want to get into the geopolitical implications of this as well. I mean, rising nationalism, rising nativism, turning inward. There's signs in the survey of less trust of products and services that come from other countries. So moving away from globalization. What does that do to the world?
Well, it fragments it. I mean, I think what's happening is less a natural response to change and more a response to loss of control. Insularity is the product of loss of control. The technological revolution that's been talked about here, I think, is one part of it, but I think there are 3 other big parts of it that take us to the geopolitical aspects. First, additional point, let's not forget, global risks are rising. It's as if we didn't have a pandemic 5 years ago. I think that's seared on people's minds, that there are risks from far away that can come into their living room very, very fast. And across the piece, there are rising global risks. Second critical point is that political power is fragmenting in a way as never before. There are multiple risks and there are multiple players in ways that didn't exist before. That's disorienting, but it's also a loss of control of a quite fundamental kind. Thirdly, no one's mentioned it, I think it's really important. The risks and the rewards of globalization have been massively unequally shared, and people feel that. And some people have a lot of control in the modern world, and others have much, much less control. And the findings in the survey, I almost feel, if you want to create an experiment to create a lot of insularity, you do what's been happening for the last 10 years. Because how many times has Davos met and people said, if we don't share the fruits of globalization well, there'll be a backlash. Well, we're into the backlash. That's what's happening now. Now, the geopolitics, I think, does play into this in a very, very profound way. People say there's a multipolar world, there are more players. I don't think that quite gets to the degree of imbalance, fluidity that's happening at the moment. I think it's much more multi-aligned. There are many different coalitions, governments, but also private players. Self-respecting global companies have their own foreign policy now, not just states. And this multi-aligned world is leaving much less control for the voter or for the citizen. So I think that if we understand the rise of insularity as one response to what is a disorienting loss of control, we have to think, what's the way to give back control? And the starting point, I won't go on, but I think the starting point, whether you're in business or in a service delivery organization like mine, what you say and what you do has to line up. And underneath this insularity, there's a lot of divergence between what leaders say they're doing and what they're actually doing. And that seems to me to be the third rail when it comes to trust.
We'll just go one beat further on that. Give some examples of what you're talking about.
We care a lot about the planet, but actually we're not going to take action to preserve the planet. We care a lot about inequality, but we're going to have massively growing divergence of the rewards. We care about our local community, but by the way, we're sacking everyone who works here and we're rehiring a load of other people. I mean, there's a big what you say and what you do question that I think is really important. And I always say that you should make sure your mission statement actually reflects what you do. If you say you care that AI should serve the world, make sure you really mean that for the people that we're trying to help in Sudan or Democratic Republic of Congo or anywhere else. And walk the walk, don't just talk the talk, I think is absolutely key.
Yeah, I mean, Arvind, one of the fascinating things about Richard's data is it is global. This is not just something that's happening in the US and Europe. You know, the numbers in the survey on India and China and the declining confidence that the future is going to be better than the present were pretty shocking to me. You operate in all those countries. What's your sense of?
Well, we operate in 170 countries. I think there's 20 where we are not, if I remember the number right. Look, this polarization, and you've all talked about it, is going on. And when people get displaced, you don't have to be a student of history to realize that people go towards the two extremes. And that is going on, and I would say you can look at the movements. Is it in the United States? Is it in Brazil? Is it across most of Latin America? Is it in France? Is it in the UK, where we are swinging from one extreme to the other? Is it in Italy? Is it in Spain, Netherlands, India, Japan, China, Korea? So it is happening globally. There's no question about it. All that said, I do believe that one of the facts, and I agree with everything Dan talked about the technological vectors, technology is a game of scale. It is really hard to do it at small scale for these big shifts. Consuming it, deploying it, using it, absolutely you can do that at small scale. And many countries find it hard to say, because scale means you've got to pick or conclude that there are one or two winners. And nations find it really hard to go do that. The US system does it automatically just because in a capitalist system, you're going to pick the winners. That's where investment goes, that's where employees go, that's where growth happens. In the other places where there is more top-down policy, and it can be done. I think Japan's a good example of that. India's a good example of that. They do pick winners by saying, we're going to pick you guys to take a technological mission forward. That's a huge part of one of the fixes back to the private-public intersection that Dan spoke of, because it is important. You do need regulations, you do need government, you do need policy, but to do what? And I think that picking and advancing the technology, which in turn creates growth, is one way forward there. But you got to then decide, if I'm going to pour 50 billion into something, that something will emerge as the champion, as opposed to 50 times one. That doesn't work, and that's when the disenfranchised mind carries on even more.
Yeah. David made a really good point that in some ways, we're in the mess we're in because we failed to do enough to address the effects on the masses of globalization. Are we about to make the same mistake again? I want to get each of you to talk a little bit. Richard clearly thinks business has a major role to play in helping us through this transition. What you think business can actually do in this kind of a situation,
Yeah,
Janet?
so first of all, I'm in 150 countries and territories, so a little smaller than you, Arvind. But I think when you think about geopolitics and this nationalism, all corporations have had to work with differences locally and globally. And I think now more than ever, you have to make choices about what are you going to do locally and what are you going to do globally. As an organization, I feel very fortunate in the last 2 years, we've kind of launched a strategy. We changed our operating model to bring our firm closer together geographically, and really have a narrative about, where are we going to be kind of pulling ourselves together and bringing practices up to operate, in a world where there is this pull nationalistically, but then where do we have to rise above? I think that's important for ourselves and how we serve our clients, and our clients are looking to us in many ways to be the eyes and ears and look around. And we're starting to see our clients spend more and more over the last 2 years on geopolitics, raising it to a board level conversation, scenario planning and things like that. And I feel very optimistic about that. That gives you the muscle and the confidence to do things in a different way. But I think I have the opportunity in the last few years to really talk about that honestly with everybody about what do we need to do as an organization? Where do we have to be completely aligned? I always use the word alignment, on our big bets and on what we have to do at scale. That's a lot about transformation, technology, investments. And then where is it okay where we have parts of our business that are going to operate locally, and having that dialogue so it's very clear to everyone around the organization about where we're headed.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big responsibility to have that type of discussion and then hold people accountable to operating in that way as you move forward.
Yeah. Dan, what do you think business, I'm turning to you in part because we went through a period where business was speaking out about responsibilities to society. We saw, particularly in the U.S., a lot of that, and you were a big and important part of that. And now, as Richard's pointed out, we've, for the last 2 years, been in a period where people are saying, I'd rather not speak out, there are risks involved, look, I'll keep my head down. How should business play this? If this is a big problem that has to be addressed, and if business leaders have the authority to address it, what's the right way to do it going forward?
Well, I still think that CEOs need to be responsible corporate citizens. That means we need to think broadly about our employees, the communities that we serve. I think that just makes sense. It makes sense for the success of our companies. I mean, the stronger our economies are, the better off in general we'll all do. So I do think there's not necessarily this conflict between caring about your employees, caring about your communities, and the success of your business. I think they're integrally linked together. I think the job is harder now because there's so much change that's happening. And at the end of the day, as CEOs, we're responsible for assuring that our companies perform as well as they can, because in change, a lot of companies who can adapt to that either shrink or go out of business. And that is the way that history has gone for 100+ years on this. And so, we need to be sure we are as strong as possible to be able to serve as many of our employees as we possibly can. But we also have to acknowledge with our employees what the changes are. I mean, I think this is incredibly important. And because we are so close to, and by the way, most CEOs don't like to talk about difficult things in front of their employees. Talking about layoffs, that's not the favorite thing to talk about in front of a crowd. I'm going to lay off 10% of you. How do you feel out there? Not great about that. But to your point, if your actions aren't aligned with what you're saying, then trust is broken. In fact, when, the biggest feedback I got back from my early Verizon all-employee meetings was Dan actually talked about layoffs out loud. And we appreciate it because we're all adults in the room. And we all know, we all listen, we understand. So I think we have to be as transparent as we possibly can be. We need to be authentic. We need to care as well. This is not one person who gets fired from a company is really heartbreaking. I mean, it affects them, it affects their family, it affects their friends, and I hope we always take it with that sense of uncomfortableness that it does on that. But I would say that there are ways to think through all of these things. We can't ignore the change. Change is going to happen. AI is going to move forward at breakneck speed. This is company versus company, country versus country. You can't fall behind on AI. You will not fall behind on quantum. If somebody has quantum and you don't have quantum, you lose. It's as simple as that. And so we have to go do this. But because we understand it, there are ways that we can work with the public sector in thinking about, are there different forms of taxation that can spread, wealth out in different ways? So there are possible solution sets to the fact that corporations are going to change to take advantage of this technology.
The three of you, I'll come back to you in a minute, David, but do the three of you see this as a wake-up call that companies aren't doing enough to deal with this trust gap? Or do you think this is just the inevitable fallout of what we're going through?
Well, I mean, every single year, Richard depresses us. So it's, grievances one year, it's insularity this year, it was polarization the other year. The world is in a state of change all over. There have always been segments of the market that are benefiting more from these changes than others. But look, anytime the pace of change external to a company is greater than the pace of change internal to a company, that company is in trouble. And so we have to accelerate.
But that's true for almost every company right now, isn't it?
I think that it goes back to many CEOs and leaders think of their job as being a custodian. By the way, I think the same is true for politicians, but that's a different category of people. If you're a custodian, you're trying to avoid risk. You believe that your role is try to keep the place calm, try to move forward, everything is okay, I just got to avoid the little pockets of conflict or debate that spring up now and then. If there is change going on, your role is to help transform the place, and that implies personal risk, because not everything is going to work perfectly. To Dan's point about authenticity. So how do you take on that role of being willing to be authentic to your people, of making decisions that could be unpopular inside the place, but explaining and giving context so people understand? By the way, 2 or 3 out of 10 of those will be wrong. So then you also have to correct yourself and accept that you were wrong. Here's a huge difference in leading when there is change happening as opposed to being a custodian. I think 80% of people believe even if they intellectually get the change, 80% of the time they behave as if they're custodians.
Well, no, that's a really great point. And Janet, maybe you can go into it a little bit deeper. A time like this demands a different kind of leadership. What worked in the past may not work now. What are the leadership qualities that we need to address this?
So we talked a lot about, authenticity and transparency. It's interesting, when you look at the pace of change, like as a leader, you could have launched a strategy and kind of followed through on that strategy over a period of 3 to 5 years. That is no longer an option. And you've got to be honest about, when you launch something, now you may have to pivot or course correct or take a little bit of a pulse check 6 months, 9 months in, and be very honest about what you got right, what you have to move, and what you might have to pull back on. And I think having that type of dialogue with your employees is really important. That's what's going to build trust. You don't want to launch something and then never talk about it again, and then the world is changing around you, whether it's AI, technology, sustainability, everything that's happening at different paces. I think you have to be really thoughtful and kind of thread that for your employees about what do we say we're going to do, what have we done, and if we're changing something, why? And that's a different kind of a leadership, mentality about being that open, being that transparent. And I think that builds the confidence within the organization. That's what people aren't as comfortable with.
Richard, I wonder if I can bring you back in. This notion of trust brokering that you introduced earlier, you seem to be suggesting something more than these folks are saying, a more active role. Can you give us a little more detail on what you're thinking business can do in a situation like this?
I think the panelists have talked eloquently about AI and the business aspects. I think the piece is that their employees are living in a very tumultuous, societal, fractured context. And they come to work quite shaken, whether it's after Minneapolis or any other events that happened, the Spanish train crash yesterday. I think that this is a role for companies in their privileged position as my employer to have a way in which you can talk about hard issues without the problem of, frankly, risk. The best part of a company is you have standards of behavior and speech. You can't do within the four walls what you can do outside. In terms of throwing slurs at people or exaggerations and so I think, again, if we want to build trust from bottom up, the company can be the petri dish in which we can start. And I think we must start because government doesn't have the ability to do this.
That's a lot. He's asking a lot. I mean, do any of you feel you have if people come to work feeling anxious because of what's happening in Minneapolis or because of something that's going on in social media, is it your job to deal with that?
Can I say two things?
Yes.
One, the report says that people are choosing closed ecosystems.
Well, that's true.
Well, it's not actually. What's happening is the algorithms are choosing people. People are not choosing the algorithms. The algorithms are shaping their own environment. And anyone who reads what Francis Fukuyama has written about how the whole debate about regulation is missing out this algorithmic power, it seems to me to be absolutely key. This is that's the crown jewels of each of the social media companies, and it's the thing that people don't talk about. So I think we have to recognize the degree to which people have agency, but also the degree to which agency is being taken away from them. Secondly, I think that one of my reflections on the last 5 years is that when employers or non-governmental organizations or anyone else takes on responsibility for solving problems beyond their own doors, they get into big trouble. And when Richard talks about trust brokering, I think there's a lot in that. I'm very influenced in my own life by the work in the 90s by a man called Robert Putnam, who wrote about bridging capital and bonding capital. Bonding capital is what you do with people who you know. Bridging capital is, and I think the idea of employers creating space for bridging capital is very, very powerful and very, very important. But if you end up saying, I'll solve the problem of your housing, of your affordability, of your groceries, of communal relations, you're taking on a responsibility that you can't discharge. And so I think that the limits of this brokering role, as well as the potential of it, is really important to demarcate.
Could I jump in on
Yeah,
that?
please. I want to hear from all three of you.
I think, look, take any one of these moments that came to our attention over the last now 4 or 5 years. When you have as many employees as we do, it's really hard to keep quiet about it. You can't keep quiet about it. The question is, what do you want to do about it? We are very clear. You take this topic about, I'll call it the word inflated emotions and a lot of topics. We are extremely clear. Our standards of behavior inside is we're inclusive. If you're our employee, we need to create an environment where you feel safe. And I'll put that in a business context. If you feel safe, you get 30% more productivity from people than if you don't feel safe. And how do you make sure that discourse stays civil? You have to acknowledge that there could be vast differences in opinions amongst people on these topics, but keep it civil. You're not allowed to make it into a place where you get hostility inside.
But Arvind, I think the question is, but you keep it civil, but do you avoid the social topics, or do you encourage the civil conversation around the social topics?
Well, we don't encourage or discourage the social topics. I'm actually quite clear that in most of these cases, we are participating in all this. We are not trying to manage it per se. However, the way you behave inside is, to Richard's point, different than the outside. If outside you want to lead a protest, etc., that's on you. Go ahead and do that, but on your own time. Inside, our job is to provide great service to our clients. That's our primary job. If that's our primary job, then we need an environment where that can happen while being aware. I'm using the word aware, not encourage or discourage, that these social topics are going to go on and people will likely spend time on them, but that's not what we are encouraging them to do at work, but we are acknowledging that people will have different opinions. Yeah. There isn't a topic on which our employees are that different than the national polls. It's just the reality.
Do you, Janet, Dan, either one of you think Richard is asking too much of business?
No, I think it's a fair ask. I mean, these are real things that are happening. We're a people business, so 400,000 people, and if they're looking at, insularity, that's a problem for us, right? I think isolation destroys businesses, not disruption, and we have to figure out a way to kind of make sure that our people aren't feeling isolated, and that our clients and our businesses aren't feeling isolated. I think it's a fine balance to get there. We want our people to feel safe at work. We want to bring their best to work. And then we also need to think about how do we share an appreciation in a global organization that different folks in different geographies are dealing with different challenges, and an awareness. It was really interesting. I just had a global meeting recently, and we spent the first 15 minutes before we got into the business of our business to really just have an acknowledgement of what's happening around the world and the different challenges. I think just having that type of dialogue, whether it's a 17-member team or a 150-member team of your top leaders globally, just giving airtime to understand what's happening around the world, because everyone's so focused on their immediacy, and I think it's really important to kind of bring it up so that we have a recognition, first and foremost, about what's happening around the world.
You agree, Dan?
I think the three of us, I'm excluding you on this, lucky. We employ over 100,000 people, and so there are widespread sets of values inside our company. I think the key for us as leaders is to be accepting of all of those, to not try to say, well, you know what, your value set is wrong, and this value set is right over here. I think that's actually like one of the key things. Like we have to embrace and not isolate. I may feel a certain way about certain topics, and Ellen, you could feel a different way about it. But we just have to be able to talk about it. Like I can't, say you're wrong and I'm right. That is the root cause of this. We all say, you know what, we're all values based, but we all have values, and they can be different. They could be influenced by algorithms. I'm not going to say that might not be a case, but we're brought up. Our parents brought us up in certain ways. We're influenced by different communities, and I think being able to have that dialogue without judgment is extraordinarily important. I think we live in a time right now where there is massive change all around us, and that adds to a lot of this worry, and worry adds to trust issues and that kind of thing. That's a fact. There's a Shakespearean quote that nothing is or is not, but thinking makes it so. So the fact is we are living with change right now. How we think about that, how we approach it, how we talk about it with our employees in a very open way, I think adds trust. It isn't to say, I'm right, you're wrong, or anything. It's to acknowledge and then to talk about these things. I think the biggest challenge to many companies' future success actually is their past success. We tend to look backwards and try to extrapolate from that. And what I would say right now is we're on the precipice of so many things that looking backwards actually is dangerous. We have to look forward. We need to think about what we used to value. Like, for instance, like collegiality used to be a thing that we all valued in boardrooms. I actually think collegiality is way overrated right now. I think we need to be able to discuss hard issues. We need to be argumentative. We need to debate. And then we need to align and then move on. But I think there are so many things in our culture and the way that we used to be that have to change going forward as a result of the massive amount of dislocation that's happening, that's incumbent upon us as leaders to be able to enable that, to discuss it, to give our employees, as John said, the space to be able to absorb all of that, because we are probably a place inside work where there is more community than there is in many other parts of their lives.
Can I add to something you said? You said something that resonates with me so much. You know, I look at our highest operating body, our global executive. Like, we've laid out kind of the rules of the road about having, collaborative discourse in a meeting. And I get on a call with our 14,000 partners, our 400,000 people, to say, this is what we do, and this is what you should be modeling as you go forward. I think just having that conversation that we want to have different views in the room, but then we want to walk out aligned, like even just sharing that and modeling that, I think makes a big difference. And I don't know that many leaders do that. So I think that's so important.
So look, I don't want these people to walk out of the room today depressed. So I'm going to ask each of you to give us one reason for optimism. And I'll start. We all come to Davos to learn. One of the interesting things I heard 2 nights ago that I think makes sense is, David, you talked about the algorithms, and the algorithms are designed to divide us, to provoke us, to enrage us, because that works for engagement. But someone was making the point to me, and I thought it was pretty compelling, that LLMs do something entirely different. LLMs are actually designed to find the consensus, to find the more of the common ground as it moves on to the next step. Arvind's disagreeing, so I'll you don't think that's right?
No.
Okay, why?
So I'm sorry, 30 seconds of computer science. LLMs are trained for intent. There's a reward function for every individual unique LLM. If that reward function was meant to keep you interested, an LLM is an incredible algorithm. It's just a black box algorithm. If that LLM is saying, give me the common answer, it's that. So LLMs are not always trying to find the least common or the most common denominator. They are effectively algorithms on data trained for a purpose through the reward functions that their creator put in there.
But most of the ones we deal with on a daily basis.
It's working on Alan right now.
Yes.
Yeah, most of the ones we deal with on a daily basis are to take us to the next logical word, next common word. Whereas social media has been trying to provoke us with the most.
I don't think it's that different than social media. They're all trained
Really?
to keep you.
I'm trying to be optimistic here, Arvind. Give me.
Look, the optimism, I think, let's channel what the IMF came out with yesterday. We are going to have higher economic growth in 2026 than we have had in the previous 5 years. Every year we think it's less, but it's more. To me, the optimism is, despite all this uncertainty, and let's acknowledge there is volatility, there is geopolitics, there is technology change. Let's look at the resilience of humanity. Through all that, we are going to get higher economic growth globally in almost every pocket than we have had. Last year, we came out a full % higher at the end. Humanity is living in the most prosperous aggregate time that we ever have. By the way, despite all the violence, and it's terrible where all it's happening, it is amongst the least violent time of the last 2,000 years. That's optimistic. Now we got to channel that in so that every single, not just 2/3 of the people get that.
Yep. Janet,
I'm gonna take
optimism.
it, so I agree with everything that Arvind said. I'm going to take it in a little different direction because we've been talking a lot about insularity and isolation. And what I see here in Davos and what I see with all of our clients is this spirit of collaboration. And so not going it alone and really working together. And I think we've gotten really good as organizations about what can we do together, what do we need to do by ourselves. But we're going to go further, if we can collaborate and do things, whether that's advancement in AI, you have the technology, but then what about the processes, the people, the upskilling? There's so much. And one organization cannot do all of that. And so I love this opportunity to have broader ecosystems working together. So I'm very optimistic about, I would say, this confident collaboration.
Yeah, I'm feeling better already. Dan.
Okay.
I think one thing which is really good because the first step on any road to recovery is acknowledging the issues, and there are a lot of issues, but acknowledging them because there are solutions to a lot of them as well. I mean, we talk about AI and its impact on the workforce, and that's real, but I also do think there are solutions to that. But it's going to create things that are unbelievable in terms of longevity, in terms of material science. It's the breakthroughs that we are going to see in terms of energy are going to be unbelievable. Now, by the way, some of those will create other issues. We will live longer, that may create issues in other ways. But there is going to be a huge amount of things that, we are all going to be like, wow, I can't believe that just happened. That is amazing for us. But I'm very much of a realist, and like that people, what did Madeleine Albright said, like, I'm an optimist that worries a lot. But that's what I am. I'm an optimist, but I'm a realist at the same time. And I think we need to have the space to be able to have, to Janet's point, very real dialogue. And I think it needs to be intercompany as well. And I think it needs to be public-private, because that's where the solutions will lie. They do not lie in pretending these things aren't going to happen.
Yeah. David, bring this home, please.
Yeah, I think there are more resources to do more good with more partners than at any time in human history. And that makes this a time of enormous potential. Today, we're using your large language models to use photos to diagnose rare African diseases in places that haven't got a health center. And so my motto for this world of more resources with more partners is very simple. It's not hope that leads to action, it's action that leads to hope. And making these partnerships, making these resources actually go further to tackle the problems, it's on us. And so more fool us if we don't do it.
Yeah. Have we cheered you up, Richard? Yeah. Good. Good. That was our goal.
Okay, so my last word. One of my favorite poems is by John Donne, and it is "No man is an island unto himself," and it ends with "Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." Why is this important? What I've processed from this research is a personal pledge to myself to fight my own insularity. I will tell you that after October 7th, I became more insular because I'm Jewish, and I became defensive. And I also found that I became politically more defensive and narrowed my prism. And my pledge for myself for this year is I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to broaden my friend group, I'm going to broaden what I read, and I'm going to try to lead by example. And I would ask each of you to examine your own behavior and ask yourselves whether you are ready to fight back against insularity. With that, we close the panel. I'm deeply grateful to all my friends on this panel.